This is the Classical Liberal Podcast. My name is Danielle. I'm out to dinner here in person with Layla Bush.
Hello, hello.
And David Wiley.
Hello.
And we're going to talk about the advocacy that David has been doing out in actual Washington, D.C.
Washington, D.C. and here at home in Washington State, not to get the two confused.
Because it's not confusing enough. So let's maybe start, when did you start getting involved in your advocacy in Ukraine? Or related to it, I suppose.
Well, I ran for office twice as a libertarian, so that really got me started with advocacy on issues, right? Wasn't really involved with Ukraine. I'd been there a few times before the full-scale invasion. And then the full-scale invasion happened. And, this is just immediately, this is a major atrocity. This is one government looking to annihilate another off the map. And this is basically the worst kind of war. And so kind of right at that point, I got involved with volunteering. How could I help? And I did some work initially with some groups that kind of, it petered out.
Remind me, David, when did it actually start? It's been over a year now.
February 24th, 2022, after a whole bunch of back and forth of whether Russia would or would not invade with 250,000 troops that were stacked on Ukraine's border.
Thank you.
Yeah. And the answer was yes, they were doing what it looked like. They were preparing to invade.
You mean they weren't just there peacefully?
No. I mean, and that's a thing that can happen. You move troops around, you have drills. But the evidence was bringing in the blood banks, setting up actual field hospitals right on the border. That says, oh, you're getting ready for people to die. So for a few people who, have any clues about wars, that was a pretty clear sign that something real was about to go down. Even a lot of Ukrainians were very much caught unaware when it happened because Russia always makes threats. Russia makes threats and threats and threats. And so a lot of Ukrainians said, oh, this is just Russia making another empty threat. But unfortunately it wasn't. So I was involved with some things initially that kind of fizzled out. And then, it just wasn't enough for me. So I wanted to find another way to get involved. I got involved with a local charity group here in Washington State, Ukraine Defense Support. And it was kind of, what can you do? What have you done, right? Everybody comes in, you've got a different skill set. And the thing is, well, I've been involved in state politics, right? One of the things I love about UDS, particularly as someone coming from a libertarian standpoint, is that it's voluntary action. They want to help Ukraine support from a voluntary perspective. And they do as much as they can as civilians, basically, without breaking the laws of the U.S., other countries like Ukraine, and so on. There's a lot of limits there. We quickly run up into the limits and okay, this is all we can do, right? And that's where it's really important to have someone who's involved politically, right? And, so that's where I start, basically.
Can you tell us some about the limits that you're encountering that the government isn't allowing certain things to be sent? Like what kinds of things?
Oh, there's all kinds. So
I'm sure guns and things like that.
Yeah, obviously. You can't send guns. And I've had people ask me, well, why can't Americans just send all their AR-15s to Ukraine? Well, we have what's called ITAR laws, International Treaty on Arms Regulations. So you can't send guns, but not just guns. There's a whole bunch of things that are considered dual use that could be used in conflict that you also can't send in most cases without a whole bunch of checks and balances. And most of the time the answer is just no. So a lot of night vision, like if you're a hunter, you buy a night vision here, you can't send it, right? So you might have it. You might have it stuff in your equipment.
Like me as a regular person, I have a friend who is currently in Ukraine. I cannot send that friend night vision.
You can't send them the night vision goggles you already own that you use to go deer hunting.
Love it.
There's things like drones that you can't send. You can't send body armor. In most cases, sometimes you can. But there's regulations, restrictions. You don't want to find yourself on the side of a felony. So, and that's one of the places where I talk. Like, hey, we want to do this. What can be changed so that this can be done? And it's really organization I'm with is like, we don't talk about taxes. That's a big fight. We don't really care where, as an organization, where the money's coming from, though a lot of us do individually, right? We're just trying to get the help. So that's me there talking to the government saying, look, we have all these need for this kinds of drones. People who are there out on the ground say they need these drones. How do we get them there? So I talked to the representatives, like, are you going to send them? Are you going to make it so that we can send them? How's this going to work? Because it's needed, right? And, besides the weapons, that's kind of the big flashy part. There's still a lot that individuals can and do. Soldiers need boots, soldiers need socks, soldiers need first aid kits, which are all perfectly legal to send overseas. So we send a lot of that, and that's great. And there's a lot of humanitarian relief that's being sent, but that need for humanitarian relief is unending until basically Ukraine wins the war. And I say Ukraine wins the war because if Russia wins the war, they're going to move on to their next target, right? It'll just end the war in Ukraine and it'll start somewhere else, most likely Moldova.
Who will need the humanitarian aid there.
Yes. I mean, this is kind of Hitler taking over Austria, then, a piece of Czechoslovakia, then all of Czechoslovakia, then Poland. And that's why, a lot of people are like, oh, America gets involved in wars. Yes, and I have protested pretty much every single one of them. And this war is different because through all those wars that I have protested, the USA was never trying to erase a country from a map and absorb it, right? And that is the type of war that starts big wars. And this is over one of the only countries in the world. Ukraine, at the end of 1991, dissolution of Soviet Union, was the third largest nuclear power in the world. People don't realize that. They think that, oh, Ukraine's just this backwater country like in Africa or something. Like, no. Ukraine was a nuclear power that voluntarily disarmed itself. And if Ukraine doesn't win, it's the end of nuclear nonproliferation, right? It means that everybody rushes to get a nuclear weapon as the only deterrent that would stop maybe someone from invading, which is, for those of us who don't like war, who don't want to see nuclear Armageddon, that's the nightmare scenario.
Well, it's very interesting because it seems like something that we're all united in the Libertarian Party about is none of us want nuclear war.
Yeah.
And it seems as if there's a lot of conflict around this issue of how to go about doing that. But it seems like, we can all talk about this issue together because it's something that's very useful. And I have to say, one of the things that was most convincing to me in thinking about this was thinking, if Ukraine still had nukes, would this have happened? And we don't want the answer to that to be no.
Yeah.
But at the same time, the U.S. can't be the world police. And so that's where the voluntary action comes in. And I really appreciate that the group you're involved with seems really committed to trying to do that as much as possible.
Yeah. And that is as much as possible. And, and fortunately there's a limit. And so the U.S. government, the quote I love to say is they either need to lead, they need to follow, or they need to get out of the way, right? There's no other choice. The people who are fighting for their lives, who are on this, bandages and boots aren't going to be enough for them to save it, aren't going to be enough to end this military aggression. They need guns, they need drones, they need night vision, they need all this stuff, and it has to get there somehow.
Well, that is a really good segue then into what you've been doing in Washington, D.C., right? Because
Yeah.
you've been able to broker some deals. I don't, that's probably not the best word, but...
I can't even necessarily say that. I can't claim that. But yes, I've been in talks with elected Republicans and Democrats trying to work out a compromise. And that's, as someone who was a libertarian, it's actually a really big strong point to go into Washington, D.C., because I'm a neutral third party. as soon as I walk in that door. Like, okay, never been a Republican, I've never been a Democrat. I didn't. Most people migrate into the Libertarian Party from one of those, but I never did. I went from independent to Libertarian, and I've run under the Libertarian banner as a candidate a couple times. So they know that effectively I'm rather neutral in the political bickering there. So it leaves me in a position to say, hey, okay, where's the compromise? And I get to offer my compromise most of the time. So.
What does that feel like, being able to go to these people and be, one of the advantages of being libertarian is we learn how to speak different languages. We learn how to speak Republican and Democrat. And so how does that feel to be able to have that skill? I mean, I don't know. How would you advise other libertarians take advantage of that?
Do it exactly the same way. Be the broker, right? If you think about it, because I ran for a legislature, and a lot of people said, what's the difference that one libertarian is going to make? Well, it's not even so much about being, if you're one versus everyone else, then of course you lose. But the point is being, wherever you can, the tiebreaker, the influencer, the negotiator, the one who's setting the terms, right? So to be the one there at the discussion table is a huge power. And so that's how, and I've been there. I've been able to discuss, okay, we want to send stuff to Ukraine. We've got these huge military stockpiles. Can we burn some of that down and send it, right? Can we unload, this surplus, and which has been hugely effective. So one of the number one, and people don't realize this, military budget, while it's not the biggest, is pretty huge. And the number one part of the military budget is maintenance. Over half of all military spending is on maintenance.
Wouldn't surprise me.
Yeah, can look it up. It's public numbers. And then when you have on top of over $400 billion being spent annually just on equipment maintenance, and then you have stuff like Stinger missiles, which sat there for 40 years. They weren't used in Afghanistan. They weren't used in Iraq. They haven't been in production. You just have maintenance people going over there and keeping them up every year.
Just making sure they didn't blow up or corrode.
Yeah, exactly.
Wonderful.
And they've all been shipped off to Ukraine, right? So that's assistance. And now, and people say, oh, we wrote off. We gave this money. We aren't sending pallets of cash. They wrote off the value of these missiles. That was the so-called expense. And in the future, there's no longer any maintenance budget assigned to it. So that military spending goes down.
So let's imagine a scenario where those remained in storage. What do you think would have likely happened to them?
They would have stayed there for another 20 years or whatever until money being spent on them every year to keep them in a usable condition until we spent money to decommission them, right? Which is a huge expense to safely disarm all these missiles and throw them in the dump.
Or America might declare a war on someone else, so.
Or we mail them to China for their dumps.
Yeah, that's true. Okay, well that's good to know. I mean, it's such a tough thing as a libertarian because I very much oppose having our tax money go to this. I really have mixed feelings even about giving these supplies, but at the same time, if they don't refill those bunkers where they had the missiles with new missiles, then I'm a happy camper. Like that, it means that we are less able as a country to start the next war.
Well, yeah, and there's no guarantee that doesn't happen, right? The libertarians aren't in control, so there's nothing being said there. But it is diminished right now, did a little bit right now, and it's going to save lives from, a military aggression. And other stuff is being offloaded. So there's been a lot of talk in the news about Ukraine using HIMARS. So there were 400 surplus units in storage in California.
I'm sorry, what's a HIMAR?
What is it?
Is it a type of missile? Or?
Yeah,
okay.
Basically, it's an artillery missile.
Got it.
Highly mobile artillery rocket system.
Kind of like what we saw in Iron Man.
Yes.
Okay. Thanks.
It shoots missiles a really long ways to hit things you can't see. So Ukraine's been using them to, do a lot of damage to Russia. And all we've sent them is 38 units out of our surplus storage lockers, which is, on itself, is writing off a lot of money. But because this system performed so well, all the remaining units from surplus storage got sold to European countries. So not only are we not paying taxes on them next year, the government got some real cash.
That's nice.
You know.
And we know that other European countries then are now a little bit better armed against Russian aggression.
Yes, and someone like me, I'm not a big fan of the U.S. being in NATO. A lot of people might assume otherwise. Now, I don't think that right now is the time where the U.S. should leave, but I think long-term, Europe should be up to its own defense. And I really like this move as weaning Europe in that direction. Like, hey, stand up for yourself, don't depend on us. The U.S. needs to have an exit plan for Europe.
I definitely agree with that. It's interesting, like just as a thought experiment, to think, what if instead of NATO we had an alliance of Eastern European countries that were all allied together, all of the ones that are on Russia's border, that would have definitely changed the dynamic, the decision, far more than NATO would have. So, I mean, NATO clearly didn't because Ukraine isn't a part of NATO. But yeah, I'm on board with that. I definitely think that's a good way of seeing it.
You look at all the countries that Russia is invading, whether it's Georgia, Ukraine, Moldova, none of them were part of a defensive alliance, right? So that is why it happened. It's imperialism. It's one big nation saying, oh, look, you're small and you got nobody to protect you. So we'll take a piece out of Georgia, see what happens. We'll take a piece out of Moldova. We'll take a piece out of Ukraine. Now we'll take the rest. And, for Georgia and Moldova, seeing that Russia is trying to swallow all of Ukraine, they know that they would be next.
Now, can we just back up just a little bit? So you've run for office.
Yep.
Did you rely on connections that you already had to get into people's offices in Washington, D.C. to chat with them? So how did that look?
Not in terms of like libertarian connections. So there's a whole bunch of Ukrainian organizations, United for Ukraine, that have kind of come together. They don't actually, at this point, have any political representation in D.C. There's nothing like AIPAC for them or whatever. So they're not engaged in lobbying, which is the word. They're engaged in advocacy, which is sending people to talk to their representatives about something that they know about, right? Because while a few people in D.C. are very well educated in the issue, getting intelligence reports and so on, most representatives are not. They're not even, and there's a lot of bills in Washington, D.C., so they don't even necessarily know what they are and what's there. So we go there, we talk to them, like, hey, there's this bill, it's really important, would you have a look at it, maybe consider being a co-sponsor, right, and let's move this along. And there's some really big zero-cost bills to the U.S. that would do a lot for Ukraine. One right now that I've been pushing for in order to fund Ukraine is called the Repo Act, which the USA froze Russian assets, right? Okay, you're involved in this war of aggression. We're not going to be a financial instrument for you to support it. So they froze money that Russia had. And Russia had about $300 billion, right?
Here in the U.S.?
Here in the U.S., right? Russia's economy not being particularly strong, they haven't invested a lot in themselves. They've put a lot of money in other countries. Canada, U.S., Europe, and most of those countries have all frozen that money, so it can't be used. Repo Act would take that money and, as the victim of the war, and send it to Ukraine, which would eliminate so much of the need for us to help them financially, right? Okay, you got your own money. It came from, it's restoring the victim.
Basically reparations.
Yeah. And that can be, when there's a peace deal, that can be taken into account. But it would do that, and it would be zero cost to American taxpayers, right? So, there's things like that I advocate for.
Now, technically, we'd be losing out on the tax revenue, right? On, the interest of the money that they have invested.
If it exists, maybe, but,
Sure.
That's...
It's
we don't have
right.
We don't have a legitimate claim to that money. It is not, the U.S. simply doesn't have a
It's
legitimate
not just
claim
in
to
a
it.
bank of account certificate of deposit making interest?
It's going to be in a bunch of different places,
Fair
most
enough.
likely.
So, what would you say to someone who is interested in lobbying at the local or state level?
Or advocacy.
Or
Yeah,
any kind of advocacy. Okay,
Important
lobbyist,
legal
okay.
difference there.
Okay. Well, I guess you have to register if you're a lobbyist, right?
Yes, correct. If you're a lobbyist, you're representing a group, you're getting into more financial stuff, so on. Advocate is just someone says, hey, I care about this, look at this bill, support this, yay, that type of thing. No money changing hands. If you're interested in being an advocate, find some groups and be talking to your representative positively, right? Most of the time when people are calling up their representative, it's to complain about something, right? And so they don't actually get a lot of people saying, this is what you should do. They get a lot of people saying, oh, you shouldn't have done that. Okay, well, a lot of good that did, it's already done.
Have you had any difficulty getting meetings with representatives or anything like that? Like if you just call them up and say, hey, I'm representing this group, I'm advocating for this issue, can I come talk to you?
It depends. There's a lot of differences in who you're talking to, because some of them may not be supporters of the issue, no matter what their public face. Some people publicly support an issue and then privately oppose it, on both sides. But yeah, some people are eager to talk to them, particularly when you offer, say, a unique perspective that they haven't really been able to hear. So, for instance, one of the things that I like to do when I'm talking to representatives, I bring in people, Americans, who've gone and volunteered to fight in Ukraine, who volunteered there and come back. Because particularly some of these people, they may have access to classified briefings and so on. That's a top general level. And the perspective of a general in the command room is very different from the perspective of a soldier on the front line. Mm-hmm. So I bring in, these volunteers and get them to tell their stories. The difficulties of having to fight at night without night vision, where they have a night vision unit that they use for hunting at home that they couldn't bring to Ukraine because of American laws.
Oh yeah, I'm sure my friend had night vision here in the States, I wonder.
Yeah, so, there's lots of things like that, like, oh, I got this equipment and I just couldn't bring it, so there's a lot of different stories. The general might want tanks, but the soldier in the trench may just be wanting a new clean pair of boots so he doesn't get, trench foot. So there's different perspectives. Some people aren't interested in the military side at all. I've had representatives that want to talk to refugees and immigrants. So because they have a different perspective. What can we do to help people? Like, I don't want to support the war. I want to know what I can do to help people, bring them here on the flip side and help them when they are here.
Have you worked with the Lutheran Refugee Agency in the area?
No, I have not.
Okay, I'm on their mailing list. I know they're doing a lot with the Ukrainian refugees.
There are a lot of humanitarian groups out there doing great work. Mm-hmm. Again, that just hasn't been my focus. I have kind of a quality assurance background, so I really want to address the root cause. Mm-hmm. That's my thing. It's like, okay, and the root cause is Russia's invasion of another country.
Well, it's interesting because it seems like there's something all libertarians can unite around, because whether you are supporting some aspect of the war effort, trying to get, night vision goggles or body armor, or whether you're concerned about the refugees and the people who are going hungry because of war, it seems to me like if we all work together, we'd get all aspects of it covered. It's very interesting. So, what would you recommend if a libertarian is interested in trying to help out? Like, what's the first steps if someone wants to do something to help in Ukraine or in that conflict broadly?
Decide what it is you want to do, right? Because a lot of people do have specific interests. For whatever reasons, I'm not going to judge. You may not want to give military aid at all. Like, say someone's a total pacifist, right? And so give humanitarian work. There's a lot of groups out there doing it. Maybe you don't want to send any money or goods over whatever, then help here. There's about 500,000 Ukrainians that have come to the U.S. as refugees, effectively, since the start of the full-scale invasion.
And a lot of these agencies are just a Google search away, right? You just
Yes.
search wherever your city is,
Yep.
refugee, Ukrainian refugee assistance or whatever, and you'll
Yep.
find something.
I'm willing to bet there's probably a church in your city that's doing some kind of drive or something, or go. There's all kinds of groups. Um, so in like my former city of Everett, there's different groups like Volunteers of America is working with Ukrainian refugees here in the USA. So you can go down there one day a week and you can help out refugees. And they get people there who their home has just been leveled by Russia. The war's still going on, so those artillery shells are still leveling cities. People are still being forced to leave, and they arrive here with commonly next to nothing, right? Most people, when they have to leave because of the war, they end up leaving in a hurry and leaving almost everything behind. And they end up in another country with no possessions, where they may not know the language very well or anything. So, yeah, they need a lot of help getting adjusted to the USA.
And then, in order to get in contact with the representatives, did you specifically find people that were like empathetic to the issue, or did you contact
Nope.
just your local reps? Or
I
your
contacted every elected U.S. representative and senator in Washington State. And I had meetings, me and the groups that I'm working with have had meetings with pretty much every office. So there's been different levels of receptiveness. But yes, every office has been involved in the discussion.
So it sounds like there's a lot of different options for people who are interested, no matter what their interest is,
Yeah.
to be engaged and actually take action in something that would be helping and supporting someone who's vulnerable or advocating for some kind of political change.
Absolutely. There is an abundance of voluntary solutions to this right now. And really, that's where I think we need to really be focusing. For me, I'm really kind of sick of a lot of the public discourse that goes on that's all kind of negative. We shouldn't do this, we shouldn't do this. Well, what should we do? What are you doing, right? We're looking at one of the worst catastrophes since World War II going on in our lifetime, right? For some of us, the words never again have a really big meaning. Not to let, genocide and the types of mass war crimes happen again, which are happening right now. And, something needs to be done, because it's really a foolish belief that, if we just do nothing, then it'll stop on its own. It's anyone who's studied history, that's not how it works. Read some Frederick Douglass, read some others, you'll learn that, tyrants are only stopped by people forcing them to stop. So something has to happen. And I understand, there are very good reasons that the USA should not get involved. I have spoken out frequently that the U.S. military should not get directly involved with Russia, short of nuclear confrontation, right? Because that's it. That's our stopgap. That's the one thing where we say, Russia, you won't use nukes, because then there's no reason for us to hold back. If we get involved, then there's the incentive for them to go that route. So, yeah, the USA should not be involved directly in any fighting.
I don't know. I guess I feel like we hit a pretty good natural end of like our call to action. Do you have anything else that you wanted to add on, or Leila, any final questions for you?
I guess I would warn people that there is an abundance of misinformation out there about Ukraine. As someone who's been to the country several times, so much stuff that I hear about it is just completely disconnected from reality. Completely. Republicans, Democrats, and Libertarians too. There's propaganda flying around from all sides. And sometimes people say, oh, well, I don't believe anything, so I choose to do nothing. Some things you can understand are very real. So at the beginning of this war, people were sending their cell phone videos and uploading them to Twitter and TikTok and other places. That is very real. Filter out the corporate media that wants to lie to you, and listen to human voices and take human action.
It seems like if you're concerned about corruption or if you're concerned about, what the cause of the war is, you can still help refugees. There's nothing that would
absolutely.
keep you from stop helping those refugees because they're just victims of this.
Yeah,
and so there's something
100%.
for everyone, really.
Yeah.
Well, where can people find you if they want to reach out, either to ask you questions or get advice on how to be a better advocate?
Yeah.
What kind of shampoo
Don't
you
reach
like?
out to me. Get involved locally.
Love it, love it.
Take local action.
What's your favorite dinosaur?
Oh wow. I was
Your
not
inner
prepared for
your
that
inner
question.
10-year-old there.
Yeah, okay. Bring out my inner 10-year-old. I believe they haven't erased Stegosaurus from the books yet.
It's pretty solid.
They've got some good armor.
Yeah, that's the kind of the dinosaur porcupine there.
Oh yeah, yeah, fair enough. All
Nice,
right,
peaceful
I like it.
herbivore swinging that spiky tail.
Love it.
Don't tread on me.
Well, that's a great place to end. Thank you, David, and thank you, Layla.
Yeah, thank you.
It's been real great.